In this video, we are doing the second part of section 6.4. So in the first part, we learned how to factor polynomials using sum and difference of two cubes and grouping. In this part, we're going to talk about actually solving polynomials using factoring and the zero product property. So zero product property, we have seen that before with quadratics. So just a refresher, that was when if you had, say, in a quadratic, if you factored it and you had something like this, we would split it up, set each factor equal to 0 and solve. So hopefully that jogs your memory on that. So that was when we did that before. So the difference between polynomials and quadratics is polynomials might have more than two factors, but it's the same idea. You just factor it and you set each factor equal to 0. So we have an example here. So we've got this big polynomial, and here it is factored right here. So we take each factor. So 4x squared, set that equal to 0. X squared minus 2, set that equal to 0. X squared minus 3, set that equal to 0. And now let's solve. So 4x squared equals 0. To solve that, we divide by 4 on both sides. 0 divided by 4 is just 0. Then we take the square root of both sides. Square root of 0 is still just 0. So that's one of my solutions. So then this one, x squared minus 2 equals 0. Add 2 to both sides. X squared equals 2. Take the square root of both sides. X equals plus or minus square root of 2. This one here, so x squared minus 3 equals 0. Add 3 to both sides. X squared equals 3. Take the square root of both sides. X equals plus or minus square root of 3. And that is it for that. So we've got another example here. So this is already factored. So we're going to solve this using the zero product property. So my first factor is x squared. My second factor is x minus 1. My third factor is x plus 3. And my last factor is 2x plus 10. So now I just solve each of these. So x squared equals 0, which means x equals 0. So that's my first solution. X minus 1 equals 0. Add 1 to both sides. X equals 1. X plus 3 equals 0. Subtract 3 from both sides. X equals negative 3. 2x plus 10 equals 0. Subtract 10 from both sides. 2x equals negative 10. Then we divide by 2 on both sides. X equals negative 5. Those are my 4 solutions to that one. So now next one. We have another one that is already factored for us. There are 2 ways we can solve this. I'll put a line down the middle, show us both ways. So first way, we can just go right ahead and do this. So x equals 0, that's my first factor. My second factor is x squared minus 4 equals 0. So x equals 0 is already solved, so we don't need to do anything else there. For this one, we can add 4 to both sides. X squared equals 4. Take the square root. X equals plus or minus square root of 4, which is, of course, plus or minus 2. So that's the first way, perfectly fine to do it that way. Second way, you might notice that x squared minus 4 is a difference of 2 squares, which we can factor even further. So it will be x plus 2x minus 2. So now we have factored that even further using a difference of 2 squares. So now we have 3 factors. So x equals 0 is our first factor. X plus 2 equals 0 is our second factor. X minus 2 equals 0 is our third factor. And now we can solve each of these. So x equals 0, already solved. Then we subtract 2 for this one. X equals negative 2. Add 2 for this one. X equals 2. So we get the same answer. Here we got 0 plus or minus 2. Here we get 0, negative 2, positive 2. It's the same thing. Both are perfectly fine ways to solve that. For this one, So this, we have a difference of 2 cubes. So again, I'm going to do this 2 ways. Let's first factor it. So difference of 2 cubes, a is the cube root of x cubed, which is x. B is the cube root of 64, which is 4. So if we factor that, we get x minus 4 times x squared plus 4x plus 4 squared, which is 16, equals 0. So then set each of these equal to 0. X minus 4 equals 0. X squared plus 4x plus 16 equals 0. Solve this one, not too bad. Add 4 to both sides, x equals 4. That's one solution. So this one, we want to ask ourselves if we can factor this. What adds to 4 that multiplies to 16? Nothing. So let's try the quadratic formula. So x equals negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4 times a times c divided by 2 times a. So negative 4 plus or minus, we've got an issue here. So this is going to be 16 minus 64, which is a negative number. So this is a negative discriminant right here. So no real solutions from this one. Whoops. So since that discriminant is negative, trying to go back, no real solutions here. So that means our only answer is x equals 4. Now, I will say that this was the hard way to solve this one, so let's do it the easy way. This is perfectly fine if this is where your brain wants to go when you're doing this, but the easier way, so yeah, you can definitely factor that using difference of 2 cubes. That's fine, but there's a much, much easier way to solve this one. So let me show you. Perhaps you might have thought of this already. So the way to do it, we have x cubed minus 64 equals 0. What if I add 64 to both sides? That's fine, right? So then we have x cubed equals 64. Now to get x alone, don't we just take the cube root? Yeah, so then we have x equals the cube root of 64, which we know is 4. So you end up with the same answer. So x equals 4 for this one. I prefer that way. My guess is that you probably do too. All right, so next one, solve this by factoring. So in this case, this is cubed. This is a cubic polynomial. It's not 4 terms, so I can't do it by grouping. It's not a sum or difference of 2 cubes. So let me check for a GCF. So the coefficients, I don't see a GCF because we have a 1, a 3, and a negative 4. But don't all of these have x's in them? We've got x cubed, x squared, and x to the first, which means you can take out the lowest one, so the lowest degree. So you can take out an x to the first, and then you're left with x squared plus 3x to the first minus 4. So you take an x away from each of those. So now that we've done that, we factored this. We took out an x, so we can set each of these factors equal to 0. So x equals 0, and that's already solved. So that's all done. And then x squared plus 3x minus 4 equals 0. So this one is a quadratic. So I want to think about factoring this further if I can. So I ask myself, what adds to positive 3 that multiplies to negative 4? Well, how about x plus 4, x minus 1? Let's think about that for a second. So 4 plus negative 1 is 3, so that works. And then 4 times negative 1 is negative 4, so that works. So we can factor this even further. Now, you could have done this right off the bat, but maybe you didn't think of it. You weren't sure if you had to use a quadratic formula, so that's fine. So we just have a quadratic here. So now we have x plus 4 equals 0 and x minus 1 equals 0. Subtract 4 from both sides. x equals -4. Then we add 1 to both sides, x equals 1. All right, so finally, our last type of example that I'll give you for this is factoring by grouping. So I know this is grouping. Well, I know I at least want to try grouping because I have 1, 2, 3, 4 terms. So I want to try grouping. And we're going to find that that'll actually work. So for grouping, first step, x cubed plus x squared. And then plus, we've got -4x minus 4. So again, I'm going to remind you, I personally like to always keep this plus. I recommend you do the same. That way you can't go wrong with these. You just keep the signs the same. So that was a -4x, so it's negative. That's a -4, so it's negative. So just always keep this plus with grouping. You can't go wrong that way. So then these first two terms, we can factor out both of our coefficients are 1, so we don't need to worry about the coefficients, but we can factor out an x squared. And then we're left with x plus 1. And then for these two, we can factor out a -4. So now it's -4. And then we're left with x plus 1. Now be careful, because if we factor out a -4, this is going to become positive. So think about it. Think about, again, reverse distributing. You can always check to see if you did it right by distributing afterwards. -4 times x is -4x. -4 times 1 is -4. So that works out. So now, one more step. This is what we end up with. Doesn't matter which factor you put first. You could put the x plus 1 first and the x squared minus 4 second. It really doesn't matter. In this, I'm actually going to factor this even further because this is the difference of two squares. So let me just so we really know what's happening. So this is difference of two squares. Hopefully you can read that handwriting. So we've got a difference of two squares. So that's going to become x plus 2, x minus 2, and then times x plus 1 equals 0. So then we have x plus 2 equals 0, x minus 2 equals 0, x plus 1 equals 0. So we solve all of those and we get x equals -2, x equals +2, x equals -1. And that's it for this section.